Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing My Brilliant Friend, Season 4, Episode 4, Earthquake. This is another amazing episode and I absolutely love the pacing of this series. Immediately after one episode ends, you just want to go to the next. The title of the episode, Earthquake, refers to not just the literal earthquake that occurs, but the metaphorical one going on with Elena. This is the episode where Elena starts to realize that Nino will never care for her as much as she cares for him. It's also the start of Elena's new fixation with the neighborhood. We start to see that her gaze is slowly shifting. The episode starts off with Elena and Lila together. They are now 6 months pregnant, and it feels like they're best friends again. It appears like they spend a lot of their time with one another. And this is the episode where we start to understand, or at least try to understand, what's going on in the neighborhood. To be clear, we will never know what Lila does for a living with these computers, and this is because Elena doesn't know. And it really feels like this episode, we are in the dark. We're confused because she's confused. From what we can kind of gather by following Lila around, it seems like the drug trade has exploded in the neighborhood, and there's a war going on that Elena cannot see between Marcello and the brothers and Lila. It seems like Marcello introduced the trade into the neighborhood, and ever since then, people have been buying for power. Now, what Lila does with these computers, I don't know, but apparently it's big business. And throughout the episode, Elena just keeps asking her questions. And she asks her questions clearly expecting a response. And Lila, rightfully so, stonewalls her because at the end of the day, she's a liability. There is no reason for Lila to tell Elena anything. As far as she's concerned, they are friends. And, we need to keep the personal separate from business. It's important to know that Elena has lived outside of the neighborhood for quite some time, and Lila hasn't. And it seems like Elena has forgotten how ugly the world is. The only time that Elena starts to notice this tension or this kind of fear that's going on in the neighborhood is when she's looking at Lila and observing what she's observing. But without Lila, she doesn't really notice anything wrong. And I think the reason Elena feels so comfortable in the neighborhood is because everyone knows that she's with Lila. You can see this right at the beginning between the interactions between Alfonso and Lila. Like, this was one of the most bizarre scenes because Elena just doesn't know what she's seeing. There is no way a man wearing a dress or a man like Alfonso could survive in a city like Naples without someone really protecting them. And in this case, it seems like that protection is coming from Lila. The fact that she's using Alfonso almost as a shield against Miguel, I think is also really interesting because it seems like whatever battle is going on, it's anyone's game. This is the first glimpse we get into how much leverage Lila has in the neighborhood. The second glimpse we get is when we bump into Gio, our old friend, who reminds us of how, of course, awful Miguel was, but also low-key how powerful Lila is. Like, this conversation was both informative and super shady. Like, I didn't really know what to make of it. Gio makes a comment about their pregnancy, and she places her hand over Elena, saying how some mothers, they can keep their babies inside their womb forever. It's almost like they don't want to let her go. And she's holding Elena's womb while looking at Lila as if to say, this does not look natural on you. And Lila has made a name for herself in this neighborhood to the point where people approach her as if she's a man. They don't really approach her as if she's a woman. Like, I think that's what Gio is getting at. She's become as powerful as any one of these men in this neighborhood. And poor Elena has no idea what's going on. And I think one of my favorite scenes is when Lila snaps at her and says, why do you care about what's going on in the neighborhood all of a sudden? You live a double life, I don't. And I think what's fascinating about Elena, like watching her ask Lila these questions, is that she really feels entitled to a response. And this whole idea of a double life, Elena really perceives herself to be a good person or an honest person, but her actions have shown otherwise. Where Lila, for better or worse, I don't think is duplicitous at all. And you can see that in the way that she lives her life. And you can even see that in the way that she runs this shady business. Like, I thought it was fascinating how this business is literally right smack in the middle of this neighborhood. Like, you can just see people walking around. And it seems like this whole neighborhood revolves around Lila. Like, everybody seems to know what she does for a living except for Elena. And again, I don't think Elena really knows what to look for, right? She's totally blind to all of it because she hasn't been like around these people for so long. There's no reason for her to recognize anything is off. Now, besides the neighborhood and kind of what's going on, it seems like Elena is also in the dark about Nino. Like, it feels like everybody knows something about him, like that she doesn't know. One of the most telling scenes is when she bumps into Antonio, and he makes a comment like, just so you know, everybody here respects you and loves you. And what I understood is that they basically would never say anything to harm her or hurt her. And I got the feeling that whatever Lila knows about Nino, she's basically told everyone not to tell her anything. Not that it would really matter when it comes to Elena, but again, you just get the feeling that everybody in this neighborhood understands what's going on, not just with the neighborhood, but with Elena. But they've been like forbidden to say anything. There are so many signs that Nino stays up to no good. And I thought this episode was hilarious because it kind of confirms what we already know, which is that he's a total prick. And I thought one of the most telling scenes was the one at the gynecologist. After speaking to Gio, Lila feels sick, and rightfully so, and they go to the gynecologist. And poor Lila has no idea that this gynecologist was recommended by Nino. And when she's explaining her stomach pain, the gynecologist automatically dismisses it as mental, which at first feels a bit strange until you realize that Nino had already told the doctor everything about them. And for her to even know that, like, that's so intimate, and that's so, it's just not something that you would discuss. And so the whole thing feels icky and off, something that Lila recognizes right away and storms off. And Elena's like, what's wrong? The doctor is great. I believe she was recommended by Nino. And she's just looking at her like, first of all, your lover is not my friend. Second of all, this whole thing is creepy. Open your eyes. I thought it was very telling how she is now 6 months pregnant and absolutely nothing has changed with Nino. She still eats dinner alone, hoping that he will drop by. And this episode was no different. He comes home already having eaten with whoever, and by whoever I mean his family, sits down to keep her company. And it's such a lonely existence that she's banished herself off to. And she has this conversation with him about the gynecologist, basically trying to get him to explain why he was even talking to her about them. And Nino is a smooth talker. He has a way of making women feel very safe around him and disarming them, because he seems harmless until you start to notice a pattern with him, which is that he's an opportunistic individual. And at one point she asks him, like, what am I to you? Like, what is this relationship? And he literally just shrugs, like he has nothing to say, which I thought summarized their whole relationship perfectly. He's not jealous. He doesn't really wonder what she's doing with her day. He doesn't really ask about her. He talks about himself. Like, nothing about their dynamic suggests that she is someone that he considers to be irreplaceable. The more time we spend with Elena and Nino, you realize that they actually don't spend any time together at all. And throughout the episode, I thought it was really funny how Elena kept asking, what is it that Lila knows about Nino that I don't? Like, she's trying to uncover this mystery, but it's like, girl, there's no mystery. There's literally nothing that you don't know, or at least don't suspect already. She's just in total denial about literally what's right in front of her. And for a moment, it did seem like this secret that Nino is not hiding very well. Like, to me, it's very obvious that he's having a lot of affairs, and he's an addict. This man can't stop. And for a moment, it seemed like Elena was finally going to get it out of Lila. Like, what is it that you know that you're keeping from me? Until this earthquake hits. And this earthquake was a huge turning point, I believe, in their friendship, and also in Elena's perception of how she sees Nino. The way they set up this earthquake I thought was fascinating, because prior to the earthquake, Lila is explaining to Elena how she's managed to take control of everyone and maintain control. And she's almost kind of bragging until this earthquake hits, and suddenly all that sort of confidence goes away. Like, the Lila we saw walking around this neighborhood, all confident, all powerful, all knowing, went away almost immediately when this earthquake hit. And Elena's reaction, she's in shock. She manages to stay calm, and she tries to just guide Lila in a way, but Lila just she's completely shaken. She doesn't know what to do, and she really feels like the world is about to end. And I think watching her friend in that state even shocked Elena, because as far as Elena is concerned, Lila is indestructible, right? Nothing scares her, nothing phases her. So seeing her like that was really kind of a once in a lifetime thing. I think for me it symbolized how a lot of the power that Lila has in this neighborhood is very fragile, and everything in this neighborhood is fragile. Like what's true today might not be true tomorrow, let alone later that same day. And I thought this conversation between Lila and Elena was probably one of the best conversations I have seen throughout this whole series. Lila basically walks us through what it's like inside her head. And I think it's important to note that Lila has never left the neighborhood, and she's had to find ways to survive extreme violence. And one of the ways is learning how to pull people apart and use them as a shield. And she describes that every man that she's been with has been like a necessity to protect her from harm that she perceives she would endure if these men were not around. And despite her many coverings, she always feels naked. She always feels vulnerable. And I think what Elena and Lila have in common is some part of them feels like they're not really good people, or that somehow the way they perceive the world is very abnormal. And Elena's reaction, like she's totally shocked. And she explains how this fear that Lila is describing that requires her to really protect herself never really grew inside her, or never really latched onto her the way it latched onto Lila. And I think a part of the reason is because she was able to escape the neighborhood. Like a lot has happened, right? The violence never ended. And I think the way that Ellen describes how she's able to deal with the chaos around her, one of the points she makes is that her covering, I guess the way that she's been able to shield herself, is through her writing, is through her fantasy. And you can see that with the way she behaves around Nino and justifies this insane relationship. And Elena somehow in chaos has always been able to find stability. Now, what she perceives to be as stable is just as chaotic as what Lila is describing, except Elena has kind of conditioned herself to believe that it's not. Whereas Lila is like, I can't really pretend that things are okay when they're not okay. This conversation alone, you could have like a whole dissertation, but you guys let me know what you think. Interpret it how you will. There's so many ways to look at it. Following the earthquake, reality sets in. Immediately, they start looking for their loved ones, and God bless Elena. Her first reaction is not even to call Pietro and her daughters, it's to call Nino, because she is convinced that this man would be worried sick about her. Instead, not only is he not worried sick about her, he is nowhere to be found. At one point, they decide to pay him a visit at his wife's home, only to discover that he fled for safety with his wife and children. And now the one thing Nino will always do is protect the bag, right? Like there is no way he's about to suffer through an earthquake and lose everything that he has. Like his instinct was to save himself. I thought it was so interesting how her instinct was to call Pietro almost as validation, because she knew that he would actually care. And he was very concerned, right? Because at the end of the day, this is the mother of his children. And one of the saddest scenes is when Elena is watching Lila reunited with Enzo and her son, because this is a real family and there's real love there. And that must be quite devastating, because she's basically self-isolated for this man that will literally do nothing to help her or to save her. Like the most he was willing to do was pick up the phone. And at the end, the people who took care of her were the people in the neighborhood. Lila, Enzo, her son, like that love, like that relief, like you could tell they were worried sick about her. And then you compare it to Nino, who just was just so relieved that he was able to escape the chaos. And just when you thought this episode couldn't get any more sad, Elena returns home alone as usual. Her children are not there. No one is there, right? Like if you look throughout the neighborhood, everyone is with their families. People are trying to console each other. And the only person that's alone is Elena. Like she doesn't have family. The only friend she has is Lila. Like there's really no one. She goes home to an empty house. And of course, the final scene is when she picks up the phone and Nino is there. And Nino is talking about how concerned he was and, what happened. Mind you, this man did not look for her. He had no idea if she was buried under rubble. The most he was willing to do is call her, Like, that's it. Beyond that, he wasn't really willing to put himself at risk. And I thought the scene of her watching the ocean while she was talking to Nino was perfect, because if you remember what Leela was saying about the ocean, how from afar it looks beautiful, but up close it's filth and piss. And that's exactly what she was seeing in Nino in this moment, right? He's filth and piss. It's raining, it's depressing. All of a sudden, the view isn't as beautiful as it was before, and there are cracks in her foundation. She's literally put herself in this lonely trap. And that's how the episode ends. And I really love this episode because it was like two parts, right? The first part is trying to figure out what Leela does. Again, we will never know what really Leela does because she will never tell her, and rightfully so. And this is the part where we have to really acknowledge that Elena is the narrator. And so we're very limited in what we know. We're seeing things through her eyes. And so if there's information missing, there's information missing. But one thing was for sure, like, I wonder how she's going to cope, because Nino made it very clear, I come first always. And the fact that he just fled with his wife and children to protect himself, she couldn't even listen to him, right? She was sick to her stomach. She had to hang up, which I'm hoping is a sign that she will finally leave him. But when you're that down bad, it's going to take a lot more than that. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.